Most people using AI for content are just winging it. They're jumping between tools, getting inconsistent results, and slowly burning out trying to keep up with it all. Today, I've got Dr. Nici Sweaney with me, and she's going to show us how to fix that. In this session, she's walking us through how to build an AI content workflow without losing your voice, your values, or your mind. Hello, Dr. Nici. How are you? And thank you for being here.
Hello and good morning. It's such a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, we are so excited. I can't wait to dive into this topic today around how we're going to do this content situation. It's so exciting. Like everyone's like, I want to do all the things. How do I do this? What do I do here? And they're like trying to do everything. And I don't know if that's necessarily working. So, yeah, I can't wait to
Yeah.
hear this. What are we going to learn today?
So, look, I'm going to run you through my own personal content system that I built using Claude Code and AI agents. And it's the thing that has kept me consistent. It's the thing that is resulting in around 1,000 new newsletter subscribers every single month. It's the thing that allows me to launch offers and get really high conversion rates. And I want to talk through kind of the skill sets that you need to build something like this for yourself because I think a lot of the time we see these kind of reels online or we see a post on LinkedIn or we see a tool pop up and people talk around these AI agents and automations and you think, yeah, I want that. But there is actually a lot of skill that goes into building a system that works uniquely for you. So I want to talk around how we still make our key point of difference when we're building out these systems so that our content does reflect us, does reflect our special sauce and actually, gives us that competitive advantage instead of just I think a lot of the time what happens is, you kind of bleed into this AI vanilla white noise and you end up sounding like everyone else, which is what we don't want. We want all the leverage of automation, but none of the wishy washy, this just sounds like chat GPT kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to talk through today.
Absolutely. This sounds amazing. I can't wait to dive in. So, let's do this.
All right. So I built this system because for me, I very much leverage being a thought leader, right? Like I'm an ex academic, ex data scientist. So when I'm in the AI space, I'm really playing on this factor that, unlike a lot of people in AI, I come from a data science and algorithm background. And being in that space means that my content needs to reflect that authority factor. So for me, that means one long format piece of content every single week. I choose to do a newsletter, and my newsletter sends out the latest in AI news, a bit of a tool spotlight around something that I'm using or loving or that's new on the scene that I think people should know about. I also talk about where to catch me next because I do so much public speaking. So I did 200 events last year. So I talk about where to catch me next. And then I usually do a bit of a community spotlight or a community win for my online education space. So we've got this kind of process where I write this newsletter. And then from that newsletter, I'm sure people listening will be like, yeah, we all know that when we write a long format content piece, whether that's a YouTube video or a newsletter, we really want to leverage that and create as many other pieces of content that are feeding back to our newsletter list or are feeding back to getting people to connect with us or whatever that kind of goal objective is. So I want to repurpose my newsletter every single week into two blogs that, are optimized SEO. We've now got to think about kind of search engine optimization, but for general AI intelligence. So for large language models, finding our content. And then I want to create a whole bunch of content. And for me, that's a mix of reels and a mix of stories and a mix of carousels for both LinkedIn and Instagram. So that's my process, and it will be similar to a lot of people listening. And because I use AI so much, I got to the point where I had really clearly documented exactly how I like this done so that AI could execute it for me. So that started with writing out my processes and really being detailed around how do I make decisions around what to talk about, what's important to me, what do I sound like, what's my brand, who am I talking to, all those sorts of things. Once I had it working well just in a regular large language model, so giving these instructions to I use Claude, giving these instructions to Claude, and then Claude was producing my newsletter well and was able to take a newsletter and suggest content ideas. I started thinking, well, I don't really want to do that every week because, especially when I'm traveling or I'm doing lots of speaking events, I don't necessarily have the time, even though it's really fast with AI, I don't necessarily have the time to kind of sit at my computer and say, all right, let's write up this week's newsletter. Okay, let's now make it into content and then sit on my phone and write out those carousels, right? So I decided to build an agent system to do it for me. I set this up actually on Claude Code. So what I did was I gave Claude Code all the descriptions about exactly how I like this done. And then it helped me set up an agent system that created this for me. And what I ended up with is 3 lines of code that I run once a week to produce all of my content. So, what you're looking at here on screen is my Notion database of where I create content. I love Notion. You don't have to use it, but having some sort of database to log all your decisions and your work is really clever, right? We know that businesses are built on systems, you can't scale without systems. So, this is my newsletter system. And what happens is in Claude Code on a Sunday, I run 1 line of code that says prep my week, right? And then I walk away. Now, Claude Code actually just released scheduled events. So I can now fully automate this. But up until that point, I was just writing in that one piece of code. And what happens is it populates this Notion database with my newsletter for next week. And what it does is it just gives me a brief around, here's your personal story. What tools do you want to talk about? Are there any topics and themes you're wanting? And I've already scraped your calendar and done a roundup about where you're going to be next, what you have coming up. And then I've already kind of put in places for your community wins and testimonials. What I love about this is I still love writing, right? And especially being in AI, the space moves so fast. So I will often see things throughout the week, or there'll be news headlines that happen that I think I really want to talk about that in my newsletter. So why I have it do this brief is because I can come in here on my phone and I use talk to text all the time. I use a tool called Whisperflow, or you can just use Notion meeting notes, and I will add voice notes or screenshots throughout the week. So if we just go back to the one that I sent this last Monday, I've added a little bit of a personal story. I just did some notes around a Business in Heels event that I was speaking at for International Women's Day. And then I got lots of lovely feedback from that. So I just dumped in some screenshots from my phone around the feedback. And again, I've added notes around like, look, I'm remaking everything with agents and systems. I really kind of want to talk about that. I also want to link people to a wait list that I've just opened up. And then I've added any extra notes around the events that I'm wanting to talk about. If I leave anything blank, the agent knows to go and fill it out by itself, but it also takes into account my personal notes. So I do this during the week whenever I have thoughts that I come across, whenever I see things online, whenever, I'm sure like lots of people, you save a bunch of Instagram posts or you take screenshots on your phone, you think, I'm definitely going to do something with that content. You never do. So this is my dumping ground for all of that. Then on a Thursday, because I don't work Fridays, we'll talk about that. But on a Thursday, I then go back to Claude Code and I just say generate the week. And what happens is my agents come into this brief and they already understand my brand voice, my content type, who I'm speaking to, how I like my newsletters written, all of that. And they take all of my notes, plus they do their own research on the latest AI news headlines. They also know to go and look at my testimonial database that I have in Notion for current and contemporary reviews from students. They also know where exactly I look for updates on AI tools. And what happens is they take all this content and they produce not only this week's newsletter fully written out, but they also recreate it into 2 blogs for my website that are around the key and most controversial opinionated topics that I raised in the newsletter. And then they also create all of my social media content. So that is my story scripts, my reel scripts, and also my captions. And my favorite part, because I love sharing carousels, is that it also creates, because I built with Claude Code my own tool that en masse creates on brand carousels for me. So then it also creates folders with all the carousels for that week. And for example, if I click in here, it then has every single one of my slides waiting for me in my brand colors with my brand, with my tag. So AI Her Way. It has the title slides. It also has all of my content slides. And it always ends with a call to action. And then if I want, I can even ask it to make some lead magnets that connect to my content. So then on a Thursday afternoon, I literally have all of my content ready to go. And I don't have to do anything else outside of that. I obviously have things that I also talk about, but this system has meant that We used to have staff that did this as they finished up their contracts. I just reassessed the situation. I thought, we can automate all of this process because essentially, when we train a human to do it, we're giving them these documents, we're giving them examples of what we like, we're giving them templates. Instead, I just gave all of that same information to an agent in the form of Claude Code and built out this system to do the same thing. So, content used to take me a whole day a week to put together, even with leveraging AI, because I'd be constantly kind of tweaking things and refining things. Then we used to have people that worked up to 15 hours a week just on content and making sure that we're talking about the right thing at the right time. Now it's, what, maybe 20 minutes of finessing anything and just pushing my newsletter over to my platform. I'm now looking at building my agents to automatically be able to even push the content over to be automatically scheduled inside of my platforms. But because I'm all about quality control, up until this point, I've been really wanting to make sure the system does exactly what I want it to do instead of just acting all by itself. But now that I've been testing the system for about a month, again, it's adding around 1,000 people to our newsletter. We get 40% open rates. We get 7% click through rates, which is really high for newsletters. So I now trust this system enough that I'm now exploring making it completely automated so that I'm not touching this stuff except for adding my original thought to the process.
Wow. This is so cool. Like, I literally love this. Oh my goodness. Okay. First question. How many bits roughly per week of content are we talking about? Like, is it say
It's
five
about
Instagram
15.
posts?
Yeah, so it's about
Oh.
15. So, it writes out my LinkedIn captions as well, but LinkedIn is just like one picture with the caption. So it's generally 5 pieces of LinkedIn content. It's generally somewhere between 5 and 7 pieces of carousels, and then it would be 3 to 5 reels, and then a few kind of story ideas as well. But it's completely malleable. So when I was instructing this system how to work, I have in my instructions how many pieces of content I typically post. You could say 30 pieces of content a week, and this system could just replicate that. So, this is why I love agents and these systems because, you know, it's scalable, right? Unlike humans, if we ask them to do 10 pieces of content or 50 pieces of content, there's obviously a time difference and a resource difference with those things. With AI systems, I mean, you get a small increase in your API costs because you're paying for more tokens for it to do more work, but that's usually in the point zero 0.03 of a cent at a time rather than these huge kind of hourly costs. So the scalability is wherever you want to take it.
Yeah. Absolutely, I love that. And with your thank you for all this detail. And even with what you're saying there, it's so much cheaper than hiring a staff member because that's what we used to do is we used to hire staff members to go through and get all this sort of stuff prepped for us and then we'd check it. And now it's just the AI doing it. What I would love to know
Exactly.
as well, yeah, is with your prompt, you mentioned how it's doing the carousels. Is that still part of the same one prompt? So it's actually making you text and images in the same prompt, or is that like a separate prompt?
No, that's all in the same thing. So literally, I say prep the week because it will do this brief in Notion. On a Thursday, when I feel like I've added all of my thoughts and I'm ready to kind of create all my content, I literally go to Claude Code and I type in generate week. So you can see this line of code here. It's slash generate week. And after I press enter on that, Claude Code goes and executes and creates all of these pieces. So newsletter, my social content, and those two blogs. And it then pushes all the carousels to the carousel app that I made and auto generates on bulk every single one of those carousels in the folder there. So it's doing it all automatically. It's all ready for me to have a look at. There's nothing else kind of required from me except to check it all, say that it's okay. And then again, like I said, I've got a third line of code that is now push content which will then put it onto my scheduling platforms and inside of my email marketing tool ready for me to send out.
Wow. That is just like the coolest thing. How do we even do this? Can we do this? How long did it take before you like
You can
trusted it
totally
enough
do
that it
this.
sounded like you?
Yeah, you can totally, totally do this. So the thing that I say to people is that, look, everyone that I show this to is like, I want this in my business, right? And I talk about building AI powered operating systems. So you can and you should have agents that are coordinating whole kind of departments in your business. So this is only one agent that does my newsletter system. I have other agents that can help me plan and launch entire campaigns. I have other agents. I was just talking to you before we started recording this. I've got another agent that sends me a daily brief. So at 6:30, it says, this is what's been happening in your emails overnight. This is what you have coming up today. These are your prep notes for it. Here's the latest in the AI news headlines. And then once I have a look at that, I can ask it to repurpose those news headlines into a post for the day so I can quickly be sharing about updates and kind of be first to market with those news pieces. So I have agents everywhere across my business, and they have the ability to work on single tasks or to work together on bigger pieces of work. How it starts is you need to really understand your process, right? And I know that, there's probably people listening now that it's like, oh, I just want the cool agents. I don't want to like worry about my process. But if you build an agent without understanding your process and what good looks like to you, I use this analogy a lot. It's like hiring a random person off the street and just hoping they'll do a good job for you, right? Just because they have the ability to act autonomously, right? Which is what we think of when we think about AI agents. Just because they have the ability to do something all by themselves doesn't mean that they'll necessarily be any good at it. So when we hire humans, we put a lot of work into, these are our standard operating procedures, these are our guides, here's a template, here's an example about how I did it last time. Feel free to ask me any questions. And in a human brain, we're constantly collecting that information in a new role to really understand how to do it. So we're learning over time when we become better at our job. You need to think about your agents or possibly using agents in the same way. So, what I say to people is to start off with a tool like Claude Skills or Claude Skills or like custom GPTs if you're using Chat GPT, because that is your first kind of litmus test at, okay, am I any good at describing this process? So what I love to do is I love to do it in the car because I do a lot of commuting. I drive back and forth to the airport a fair bit because I do so much travel. And when I jump in the car, I'll pick one thing in my business. So say like making my weekly newsletter. And I will put on voice mode, or like I said, I love using Whisper Flow for talk to text. I'll put on voice mode and literally for like 40 minutes, I will talk to these tools about the exact way that I do that thing, right? Where I get the information from, how I decide if it's good information, what's interesting to my audience, how I like my newsletter structured, how long it should be, what it sounds like, what words I use, what words I don't use, what I want the action to be outside of it, how I want to build on my newsletter, what are the goals for the newsletter subscriber list, all of those sorts of things. And what I asked the AI tool to do is collate all of that into a really comprehensive standard operating procedure or product requirement description. And I love using Claude for this because their inherent skills about how to put together documents is really great. But it will put together a 30 to 40 page document about just how I write my newsletter. Every decision in there, everything that I do, everything that I don't like, examples of how I've done it in the past. And then I ask Claude to create a skill file with that. So a skill file is just a markdown, which is a simple form of coding language to tell large language models how text is formatted. It's a markdown file that exactly describes how you do a certain thing. So you can see in here, I've got this newsletter skill file, and it is long, right? Like we are talking thousands of words that capture how I write my newsletter. And it's really important to have this because this is what the AI tool will refer to every time it's asked to do a certain task in order to understand how you like it done. So this is the first skill that people have. I'm using the word skill a lot, but this is the first capability that people have to build. You have to have a documented process before you can build anything that's fully autonomous. If you don't have a documented process and you just say, write me a newsletter, you're playing roulette with the quality of that. And one time it'll be great, one time it'll be meh, one time it'll just sound like everyone else's, one time it'll repeat stuff that it said last week because you haven't instructed it exactly how to work. So this is your first port of call. But once you have your skills files, the awesome thing is they can be used by agents as well. So when you get into the land of agents, whether you're using Claude Code or OpenClaw, you can give them this skills file and say, hey, I want you to be my newsletter writer. This is exactly how I do that. Then when we write our newsletter, I want you to repurpose it. Here is my skill around how to repurpose this stuff, right? So I have another skill that's, how I repurpose my newsletters into social media content that describes exactly how to do that, that has the content formulas that I use, that has my LinkedIn brand voice, that has a playbook for every platform about what I'm trying to do there, exactly how I speak. So once I started using Claude Code, it literally was just hey, I want to make a fully automated system that creates my newsletter and that repurposes it into social media content. And I just said, I'm just going to give you all my skills files, and then you're going to help me work out what that process should look like. And it literally took me, hmm, I want to say maybe a couple hours to get this all up and running. And that included building this little mini app to create my carousels in bulk, using my brand colors, using my brand font, using the way that I actually talk about these things. So within an afternoon, I kind of had this system up and running. I will say that I do this all the time. This is exactly what I do, but it starts with understand what your process is, document that, make sure a large language model can execute on it. Because when we do it with a large language model, we can have a back and forth conversation, right? Like I can say to Claude, make my newsletter, and then it will do it. And I can say, oh, don't love that part, or did love this part, or I need a bit more here. You need to do that feedback inside of a large language model so that you can have that back and forth, so that you can work out what the ideal process actually is and what's all the detail that I actually need to give one of these tools so that they can do it all by themselves. When you get to the point that you can just say, do my newsletter, and you actually like the output the first time around, that is your signal that you are ready to give those instructions to an agent. And then you want to explore using something like Claude Code or OpenClaw. I will say if you're new to agents, don't use OpenClaw yet. There's a bit more of a security risk there. So go with something like Claude Code, but you can absolutely build this out because you can use it just describing what you want. And if you understand what good looks like, that is the most important thing that actually sets you apart and enables you to use these tools really well, and not just like as I've got Claude Code and I've watched a YouTube tutorial and I have no idea what to actually do with it. It's because you don't understand your process. So that's a fundamental thing about everything.
Amazing. It's just so interesting the way it all just slots together. So essentially, you're just creating different skills, as you said, for different things. And then you're just telling it, use this skill for this, use this skill for this. Would you mind sharing with us just like, even just like the top 10 skills that you use in your business, just so people have an idea of the different type of skills they can actually create?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's have a look at what I've got currently running in my skills folder inside of Claude. So I have one that helps me write my speaking presentations. So I do a lot of keynote speaking, a lot of workshops. This one helps me prep for those events. What it does is it researches the audience, it researches their pain points. We survey most of our audiences when we go into workplaces. So it looks at the survey results. It then looks at the last 5 audiences that are the closest match to that one and uses my past presentations from Canva to pull together a new slide outline. So that one's really nice. I have the newsletter generator that we've just been through. I have a second newsletter, which is a paid newsletter around how I'm scaling the business to 2 million with only 2 people in the team on part-time hours. So we have one trained on how to write that newsletter. We've got the newsletter to social media. So how do we repurpose long format content into our social media platforms? I have ones that interview me to create new agents. So I have an agent that gives me interview questions about my process that helps me identify what else I could make into agents and writes out the role cards. I call them role cards because it's easy to remember that they need enough detail, like if a human was going to do it, but like a random human off the street. So these role card interview processes, I also have ones that review all of my instructions to make them the best that they can be. So once I have a skill file, I have a skill that looks at the skill file to let me know if I should have anything more in there. So lots of kind of continuous improvement things. I have one that you can upload your current SOPs. So if you are like a more traditional business that have written standard operating procedures, you can upload that and it can convert them into agent instructions for you to be able to offload it to them. I have ones that are just for email marketing. So outside of the regular newsletter, just how do we write copywriting when we're offering different things online or we're promoting things through email marketing. I have ones that are for my daily briefings. So my ops manager, my admin assistant who does my emails, reviews meetings, preps me for things, tells me the top 3 priorities according to my business goals and my revenue metrics and what I'm wanting to do this quarter. So it's constantly reviewing, giving me updates. I have ones that answer client support questions, so triaging my inbox and actually drafting responses to client questions based on how I've responded to those things in the past. Ones that build out funnels, ones that take a campaign and structure the entire campaign, every piece and every offer along the way, including your email marketing, lead magnets, webinar funnels, post lead magnet follow ups, all the social media that goes along with it, and launch timelines and delegates it to my team so that everyone on the team knows exactly what they're meant to be doing. I've got ones that are around copywriting, it's like landing pages, websites, how to write really persuasive copywriting, and then ones around how to produce just YouTube content. So SEO, thumbnails, script writing, keeping an eye on what's trending on those platforms and suggesting topics to me. And, we have them in lots of other places as well. So this is my area because I'm the CEO. I do a lot of the strategic work and lots of the thought leadership content work. But we have this stuff operating all across the business. So I often present this model in presentations. This is kind of my organization chart. We have 3 humans, or actually we have 2 humans right now because somebody's just finished up their contract and I am trying to automate out as much as possible before I rehire. But outside of the 2 humans, and we both work part-time, we have AI agents or systems or skills that touch every part of the business. So, across sales, invoicing, managing the inbox, campaigns, ad spend, product development, running my new products through what we call our focus group, which is actually a bunch of agents that are trained to act like our ideal clients. So they give us feedback on our products. They tell us what they love about it. They tell us how likely they are to buy it. They tell us what price points are, what questions they'd have, any objections. So we can really prep ourselves for any of those sorts of things. Financial analysts that tell us where we're getting our profit from, what's costing us too much, reorganizing how our budget actually works, client onboarding. One of my favorites is that we have agents that are experts in every single piece in our tech stack. So if you run into an issue with we build automations on NAN, if there's something you can't figure out, we can assign it to the agent that's an expert in NAN and it can fix that for us. Or if we run into a problem with Notion or we're wanting to use something new or something, we use Go High Level. So we have agents that are experts in our tech stack so that we can troubleshoot with them like you would with an IT member. So we have them everywhere. Yeah.
I'm honestly blown away. I'm like, "Oh my goodness." She's like got this whole thing and it's like and I'm like listening to it and I'm like, "Yep, cool, that's another person. Yep, cool, that's another person." Like I'm listening and there's like maybe 18 to 20 different high level staff members in your business currently. Because you've got your financial person, you've got your person who like manages it, but you've also got your person who looks at it strategically and is like, "Okay, if you do this in this area of the business, it's going to affect this," as opposed to just a bookkeeper. Then you've got the person who's like handling the emails, and then you've got the person who's like handling all of the tech issues, and like different people for different tech issues. And I'm just like, wow, I can't believe you built all of this. It's one of the most that listening to you talk is one of the most yeah, just comprehensive AI like suites, I guess, that I've heard anybody really even mention. So this
Thank
is
you.
phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's what I'm passionate about. We've been doing it since the start, and I guess, my background in academia and research and then in business consulting, I've always kind of really approached AI from a systematic lens, and it's a different way of thinking about what is possible for you. Lots of people consider AI this like add-on tool, right? So I can open this tool and I can use it to make me slightly faster at this one thing, and then I'll close it and go back to my normal day. But what I invite people to do is really rethink how they operate. And what I talk about is, even when I show something like that organization chart, right? When I show something like that, you imagine that these are different personas because if you were hiring humans, they would have to be different personas. But when we think about what is possible with agents and with skills, think about it like skills are pieces of a transformer, right? And your agent is like the body of the transformer. And when a transformer is faced with, like, I'm showing my true kind of nerdy side here, but like when a transformer is faced with a given scenario, right? If we think about like Bumblebee, so we think about the yellow car, yeah, it's a fast car. But when it's faced with a certain situation, it can transform into what is needed in that scenario. So, like, it can pull out the extra weapon, or maybe it's like a knife that it needs that time, or maybe it needs to be able to run really fast. That's the cool thing about Transformers. So, when we think about agents, they aren't constrained like humans are constrained. I can assign a task to one agent, but if it has access to 100 different skills, it can put together the right kind of coordination of skills in order to execute on that task. So we're really starting to escape the confines of what we would expect humans to be able to do. Because if I'm ask you to do something, you have certain skill sets, and that's the job I've hired you for. And if I want you to do something outside of that, that you've never had exposure to, I have to go and hire someone else with those different skill sets. But agents aren't like that. Agents are the transformer of human skilled task rabbits. So, with that one kind of overarching agent, I can say, all right, we've got to follow up on these emails. I want to follow up on that lead. Can we send the proposal out? Can you also prep me for this speaking event? And can you turn those news headlines into a social media post? And it can go and gather the appropriate skills and look at how exactly I do those things and then execute those tasks because it's put together that bundle of capabilities. And then if I ask them to do something totally different, like analyze my finances and go and do a competitor research report, it can put together that bundle of skills in order to execute.
It's just so cool. Like, the way it just is like, you're just like, "Okay, today I need you to be this. Tomorrow I need you to be this," you know? Like, it's just amazing. It's
Exactly.
just such a cool new world.
Yeah. And that's, it feels normal to me now, and it didn't take that long to get there. So I guess if people are watching this and they're like, I want this, your first point of call is to document your processes. It's to understand what you currently do in your business and to have really comprehensive documentation for each component of that. Because unlike hiring humans, so, the one thing that I will say that humans have that AI doesn't have, right? Or, I mean, there's several things, but one of the important things if you're thinking about hiring AI staff, when we hire a human, we might hire someone with like 10 years of marketing experience that has also worked in my case, like startups that are fast paced, that also has inherent knowledge of AI. And that I can kind of describe to them what they want, but they're using all of that context to be kind of good at it without necessarily lots of nuanced instructions. When we hire AI, we have to remember it's like a blank slate of a human brain. Yes, it has amazing capabilities. Yes, it has huge capacity. Yes, it can work very fast, but it really has no idea around what you would expect from it compared to other people. So we need to be as detailed as possible. And that's why I love speaking through how I do something because I get a lot more nuance when I'm talking and then again, asking these tools to kind of put it together. I like using a product requirement description. So asking these tools to create a PRD because PRDs will have specs in there that is more nuanced than a standard operating procedure because it's trying to write a document as if you're creating a system to do it. So it's automatically going to think through in a bit more detail. But yeah, I have these huge documents that then I'm just repurposing to say, what are the key skills in here? And I'm leveraging AI to help me identify those. All right, now let's map out any of those skills. Ask me follow up questions to fill in any of the blanks so that you can exactly replicate this how I want it. Then you need to test it. You need to ask it to do the thing, look at the quality of the output, see how it approaches it. Then that's your signal to take it to something like Claude Code and say, hey, I'm wanting a system that does XYZ. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of skills files. I'm going to give you access to where I've saved all these skills files on my computer. We're going to analyze all of that. We're going to put together a bit of a system and just keep talking it through and keep saying, all right, give me your plan for that. I'll approve the plan. All right, what's the next step in that? And then you just keep on building on top of that. So start small, but all of this is totally possible. But just start with one task that's repetitive that you feel like you can explain really well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much detail. I love this. So, if we take it back to the content creators, who are
Mm.
the main audience here, if they were thinking, all right, I need to build something that's going to make my content like you have, would they be starting with like a skills document that talks about them, a separate one that talks about their ideal client, a separate one that talks about how you like Facebook posts, a separate one that talks about how you like LinkedIn, or how would they kind of structure that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I always advocate for like the more detail, the merrier, because there are nuances with how you approach separate things. If people are thinking, how do I get started? Literally like leverage a large language model to help you kind of map it out. So you could say something like, I am wanting to create an automated content creation system across these key platforms. So LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, let's say, for example. Can you ask me a series of questions so that you fully understand how I do this task currently and what good output would look like? And at the end of those series of questions, I want you to map all of the skills files, or if you're working in ChatGPT, all of the custom GPTs that would be useful for me to create in order to be able to replicate this process. The more detail that we can give and the smaller that we can kind of contain that detail, the better the systems perform. So, what I mean by this is like, you don't want to create, and I see this a lot, you don't want to create one custom GPT or one Claude project or, one Claude skill that does every single piece of content from long format all the way down to like your X threads, for example. Because when we try and capture that detail in one file, it can get easy for these tools to get a little bit lost in what you really expect at every step along the way. So it's like writing a recipe out, right? Like if you were writing a recipe for content creation, you would not write a recipe that has newsletter, YouTube videos, and short form social media and reel scripts. You would write a different recipe for each thing because the outcome is the complete recipe, right? So like great reels is one recipe because a great reel is the outcome that you're hoping for. So if you think about it like that, the more that we can break it down, the merrier. But like I said, I use a lot of talk to text. So I talk through everything from start to finish. I put it all together in one huge document. Like this is how AI Her Way creates content. Then I repurpose that document. I say, can you break this down into a list of skills that would be relevant to have? So you don't have to think about it from scratch. You can just talk your little heart out around how you do something, if that's content creation. How do I go from where I start with this process to the finished product? What does it look like along the way? And then leveraging these tools to help you break that down into those more nuanced files that these tools need in order to execute to a really high standard.
Absolutely love that. Thank you. And also with your, I just want to, just again with the content creators, you're at a level now where you're not really adjusting any of the content that it makes, are you? You've got it refined to the point where you can pretty much just post in your own voice everything that it's producing.
Yeah, exactly. So I started off with these, and I've been leveraging AI to help me write content since the start of generative AI. So I've had a lot of practice in giving feedback and kind of capturing my voice. But because I started off with that skills file that I could test, and as I was testing it, if I was like, oh no, that hook doesn't grab my attention, or like I don't use words like that, you'll see these things come up. Don't expect it to be perfect the first time. But as you're giving it feedback, you want to put that feedback into the behind the scenes file. So in my case, in that skills file. Because if I'm constantly having to say, oh, that hook's not opinionated enough, or it's not niche enough, or it's too broad, then obviously that was part of what I should have included in those instructions. So once you're giving it that feedback, you get to a point where you're saying, all right, repurpose this into social media content. It's spitting out those 15 pieces of content and you actually like all 15 pieces of content. That is your signal that you're ready to automate it because you've trained your staff member well enough to do the job. So now I absolutely like if I just go back to the newsletter that I sent on Monday, right? This is the output of the newsletter. It also creates a pretty HTML version in all my brand colors, but we're inside of Notion right now. So just show you what it looks like here. For example, when I first started doing this just on Claude, it was rounding up the AI news headlines, but it wasn't giving me hyperlinks to the actual article. And that is a key part of what I like to do in my newsletters. I like to say, here's the headline, here's what it kind of means to you. If you want to read the whole thing, here's the NBC article or like wherever I found it. So just by tweaking those instructions, now I get a newsletter that has read more and actually has the hyperlink to the original article in it, for example. Or like when I said, what's coming up, I was like, oh, it was just grabbing everything in my diary when I first built this. And I was like, well, I don't need them to know about, my pedicure appointment or like some random meeting. I only need them to know about like public facing things or big speaking events. So I had to tweak those instructions. But now, literally, this is what I sent out on Monday to my audience. I also like having a range of subject lines to choose from. But yeah, it's like you can keep the human quality control where that matters to you. You can keep the personality where it matters to you. But I've instructed it to work so well that I'm really happy with the content it produces and it keeps me consistent. Of course, I can send out other emails if I want to. Of course, I can post about things as they occur to me. But it means that even on my busiest weeks, I have at least a newsletter, two blogs, and around 15 pieces of content that are going out that raise awareness around what we do that kind of keep that voice there. If I want to do extra, I can. But if I don't, I haven't had to kind of leverage anything to make that happen.
Yeah. It's just amazing the way you've got it all so set up and so clear. Like, it's really, really, really phenomenal. Is there anything else you think that we should know today if we are a content creator who's wanting to put together some systems like that?
Yeah, I think, for example, mapping out what your kind of ideal organization chart is a place to start. So we put together this resource which helps you identify exactly how your AI/human organization chart should look and where those roles lie, and gives you the example of my organization chart that you can draw inspiration from. When I teach people in our online space, so we have an online education space called the AI for Impact Hub, the first thing we do is help you map out what your chart should look like, right? Where are all those roles? And if you had all the money, time, resources in the world, what would those personas be doing for you? And what would that support look like? And then you have to think about, okay, what deserves being done by AI versus what still remains human. So I'm a big advocate for ultimate human quality control. I don't actually like posting things without at least seeing it because I like to ensure that it reflects my personal brand. I also think that's a really key differentiator in this land of AI slop that we're kind of entering. So I like that human quality control. I like picking my own subject lines. For example, you know, I like deciding what good looks like. That's really important. We employ AI to execute, and the other humans in my team are much more kind of agent orchestrators. So they are people that are managing these teams of agents that are executing things on their behalf as well. They're just the ultimate quality control. So mapping your organization chart, really useful. And then just pick one area, drill down into something you're doing on a repetitive basis, and just describe in as much detail as possible to one of these large language models exactly how you do that. Ask that tool to package it up into a PRD, and that is your starting point. You literally could then go across to something like Claude Code and say, hey, I'm really wanting to automate XYZ. I'm going to give you my document that describes exactly how I do it. Can you help me work this through? And it's going to talk you through exactly how it could help you do that. Of course, if you want more help, we're around. That's exactly kind of what we teach. But starting with your processes is the number one thing that makes you actually good at leveraging these tools and that gets you to the point like we are, where we have a couple of people working part-time hours and we get a huge amount of output because we're leveraging AI as a system and as a collaborator, not just as this nice add-on tool.
It's amazing. This has been so, so, so informative. I feel like there's just so many, like, if someone was writing a list, there'd probably be 100 tips in here that they could implement today. So this has been
Might go
amazing.
back and rewatch.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. People need to rewatch it. But where can people find you? Where do you hang out the most?
Yeah, so I hang out pretty much fairly equally on LinkedIn and Instagram. So Instagram, I'm AI underscore her way. And on LinkedIn, I'm Dr. Nici Sweaney. You can also find AI her way on LinkedIn as well, but I hang out more on my personal page. And you can always reach out to us at www.aiherway.com.au or email at hello@aiherway.com.au.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Nikki. It has been phenomenal.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.